Thank you. I'm like, where is this random top coming from? But, sure. Yes, sir. Okay, okay. Oh, really? And it's countdown back here, so. I don't see that.
The bylaw, 6:30 last Wednesday, to see if we could take a roll call vote. When do the, like I said, voicemail. I saw in the bylaws it was time. Sure. Yeah, yeah. Right, so actually, I sent you an email, because I told you, I was like, I think it's.
I want that. Typically, every time you
So
guys.
that's.
You know, I'm good now for the morning. Even on the second day. Do you guys need anything now? There's some teas and ginger ale and Dr.
I said, like,
Dr. Coke.
great.
Council used to have all the,
Or Diet Coke or
council used to have all the candies. Yeah, candies at night.
we're trying to get efficient like office.
Tommy and Dan, y'all don't have no candies up here anymore? You cut the budget?
Lee Pammy doesn't want us to get comfortable, so he can catch the second half.
Yeah, right.
There's a much closer gain in progress. I do have YouTube TV on the phone, so I seem a little distracted. Carry it.
Well,
Recording in progress.
I now call the January 25th, 2023 meeting of the Farmville Planning Commission to order. Tonight, we have gathered for a plan unit development work session. And I do want to remind those of us in attendance and those that are joining us online that we will not conduct any official voting business tonight. This is simply an opportunity as a commission for us to continue our learning, to ask good questions, and to prepare ourselves as we continue to move forward in this process. I do want to recognize that we have Commissioner Rhett Weiss joining in virtual capacity tonight. So we are very thankful for technology and all that it does for us. And with that being said, I will ask for a roll call.
Mr. Patterson,
Present.
Ms. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Davenport, Dr. Miller,
Here.
Ms. O'Connor,
Here.
Mr. Weiss,
Here, virtually.
Mr. Crute.
Here.
We will now take a look at the agenda that is before us, and at the desired time, we'll ask for an approval of that agenda.
I move that we accept the agenda.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to accept the agenda. Oh, I said the words at the top of the meeting and forgot my own words. So we will go ahead and consensus. We'll go ahead and move into our discussion for the evening. So we have our plan unit development discussion. A couple of things that we will partake in to lead us through that. We will have a staff presentation. We will offer the opportunity for public participation. Speakers have 3 minutes to make statements. We will have a discussion amongst the Planning Commission, and then we will discuss a date and location for an additional PUD input and information session, along with the next steps that we will undertake. So I now turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We sent out a packet earlier, and in that packet, we provided just some materials that were sent previously. So there was a staff report from January or December, actually, and then the example plan unit development ordinance from the city of Lexington, and also some draft meeting notes from the input session last week. We also sent out a reduced slide deck from that same session. I had intended to send out a comparison of the statements of intent for the 6 plan unit development ordinances that we reviewed. So we actually reviewed an additional one, Cape Charles on the Eastern Shore, and then also a chart that was at the request of the Planning Commission from last month to just try to get some sort of semblance or bearing on what the other localities were had in their plan unit development ordinances. I hope that was informative on some level. It wasn't exactly clear what needed to go into that chart, but we did our best. With that being said, I'm just going to direct everybody to the slide deck. Some of these slides you've seen before. Some of these slides are going to be new, but I did want to recap some of what was said at the council work session on January 11th, and then also the input session the following day on January 12th at the Moton Museum. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about plan unit developments? Again, on June 10th of 2020, that was actually a big day for land use planning in Farmville, because that was the day that the zoning and subdivision ordinance was adopted along with the comprehensive plan update. Both documents, not just the zoning and subdivision ordinance, they are living documents, which means that as situations arise or as conditions change, those documents should change with that. With that, with the conditions. We've also got multiple development inquiries. We've actually received several, 5 to be exact, and they've been asking about our processes, and they've been asking about things that aren't quite enabled in our subdivision and zoning ordinance. So a plan unit development ordinance would actually help them out, would actually provide the flexibility. Good land use planning practice and policy. This is not something that's new for the planning field, but it is something that would be new to Farmville. So if we go back to the zoning and subdivision ordinance adoption of June 10th of 2020, at that time, the town manager had indicated that the plan unit development ordinance was left off so as not to, I guess, complicate the the adoption of that ordinance, and that would give some additional time to to talk about plan unit developments. Zoning and subdivision, the way that we administer that now is almost strictly by the book, and as such, we have to, we're really forced to go off of the bulk regulations that are encoded in the zoning ordinance. So, and you'll see me and you'll hear me say this in a future slide, that the ordinance almost demands a suburban style of development, which is quite frankly not appropriate for a small town like Farmville. And economic development is another byproduct of the plan unit development, or not really a byproduct, but a point of emphasis, because the more rooftops that we have, the larger the market and the more visible we would seem to appear to businesses and to national retailers. And we've actually received several inquiries about when is a certain grocery store coming or when is a certain department store coming. They need rooftops in order to answer that. I do want to pause here for a second because Mr. Weiss, Commissioner Weiss, has asked for the slide deck, and we don't have the ability, Rhett, to display that on the screen, but I can email that to you. If I could just pause for 1 second and email that to you, would that be okay?
That would be fine, or if you could just share your screen on Zoom, that would work too.
We're on two different computers. That's the issue. The slide deck is on a.
I see.
Okay.
Isn't the slide deck in the packet that you sent out last week? I think
That
it
was the slide deck from last week. The current slide deck that I'm displaying is not in the. Yeah. And I actually need the flash drive to do that, so I'm going to, I'm going to keep going. Yeah. Okay. So here, this next slide, just a word about what the plan unit development is. It's a concept that allows for the flexibility of design, but it's important to stress that it's in conjunction with a master plan. So as I had mentioned, our current R1, R2, B2, whatever zoning districts have very specific setbacks, other design other design requirements that are not flexible. But a plan unit development, a developer can come in and propose something that, that the Planning Commission and the Town Council can look at and approve separately from those standard bulk regulations. So flexibility, they come from a couple of places. Incentives or bonuses written into the ordinance. A popular one is increased open space for more density, and bulk regulations like parking and setbacks. You can vary that. And again, waivers and modifications are reviewed and approved as part of the legislative process. What I mean by that, again, a planning commission review and a town council decision. Nothing happens with the plan unit development without that happening. So again, all we're talking about at this point is the process. Plan unit developments, again, encourage infill and traditional neighborhood design, and the current ordinance does not, already stated. Comprehensive plan, there is a mix of uses and ranges and a range of densities that are suggested, and design flexibility and focused planning areas are also suggested. So there are justifications in the current comprehensive plan for that. I won't go through this whole list, but in each plan unit development ordinance that we reviewed, each community has a set of design considerations that they want in a master plan. This happens to be the city of Lexington's. So the inset to the right just basically says that this is a statement of community aesthetic and vision. And Chairman Patterson, to your point from a couple of months ago, is this something that is something that you can edit, something that you can customize? And the answer is definitely yes. When you do that, they should also be tied into the zoning ordinance so that they're hard-coded and that they're actually made law. Just to reiterate for the fourth time tonight, and I'll continue to say this, plan unit developments have to go through the process of going to the Planning Commission for a review and to the council for a decision. After that's been approved, most likely through a rezoning in this case, the developer or the engineer will have to come back for a site plan approval and possibly for a subdivision approval if there are lots involved. So prepare for multiple public hearings. Each plan unit development will be unique. There is no such thing as a standard plan unit development. Everybody comes in with a different proposal and a different piece of property, so they are reviewed and decided on the merits of each case or the merits of each proposal. Just because you do one doesn't mean you have to do the other one. Applicants, they have to justify the designs that deviate from standard zoning requirements. So again, we talked about why plan unit developments are desirable. It's that flexibility. And this is really important, not just for plan unit developments, but for any rezoning or master plan. We need to be getting studies for how that development is going to impact us from a traffic or transportation standpoint. Utilities, does our utility system have the capacity to support that? Same thing with the streets, and definitely with the environment. This map you saw last week, this basically, or I'm sorry, the week before, this basically is a map of some of the pieces of property that could be potential plan unit development sites. And this is our future land use map overlaid on that. What are the basic components of a plan unit development ordinance? As I had mentioned in the staff report, as well as on this slide here, every plan unit development ordinance is going to have a statement of intent or purpose. And again, we provided all 6 of the ones that we reviewed, and we also provided those statements of intent and purpose with some with that chart with the comparisons. There's always going to be a process section, and when that process is applicable, there will always be design standards like bulk regulations, landscaping and open space requirements, transportation, if private streets are allowed, for example, or if they're not allowed, sidewalks, those kinds of things, trails, amenities, things like tot lots and clubhouses and things of that sort, architectural requirements, if a certain amount of brick is desired, that kind of thing. And the final thing that is basic for all plan unit development ordinances is what are the allowed modifications, what are some of the density bonuses that are allowed, to what extent are modifications allowed. Now we get into a little bit of some new material. What you've got on the screen and what was also provided in the packet are the draft notes, some of the notes that, or some of the comments that were taken from that input session. I won't read them because you all were there, but basically there were some concerns about, public input, both in favor and that there was not enough public input. Let's see what else. That there is also an example of a plan unit development in Prince Edward County. The opportunity for fairness in the public's input. There's never a right time for the market. So there were both comments in favor and in opposition of a plan unit development. Where do we go from here? We're going to need to listen to you. We're going to need to listen to the public. The staff is, so we need your guidance. What do you want to see in an ordinance? You've seen, certain other comparisons. We can certainly provide the entire ordinances to you if you're interested in that. But design, density, and use considerations, as you're deliberating this, consider your comprehensive plan. Again, the public is weighing in on justifications in favor of and opposition to a plan unit development and the participation component. So to what extent does process factor into this? One of the very specific asks for tonight by the staff is, when do you want to have your next, or when do we want to have the next public, participation date? What works best for the staff is either Monday, the 6th of February, or Thursday, the 9th of February. 6 o'clock is when we started the last one. And I'm going to forward to the next slide, which is a 3-month look ahead in terms of the meetings. Tonight, Wednesday, January 25th, is the Planning Commission work session. And basically what we've got, the rest here are going to be the next town council work sessions, regular meeting dates, Planning Commission dates, things of that sort. I've highlighted other 2 dates, Monday, February 6th, or Thursday, February 9th, possible public engagement session. And then Wednesday, February 15th is going to be your next Planning Commission meeting. I should add that that meeting is going to be a pretty busy meeting because you've got 2 public hearings that are unrelated to the plan unit development discussion. First of all, we had the plan of development for the site plan for Mr. Huffcut with ice cream, which was deferred at their request. So they are now ready, and that will be heard by the Planning Commission on February 15th. That does not go to town council. It's strictly a Planning Commission review and decision per the zoning ordinance. As I had mentioned earlier this month, there's a zoning text amendment for the floodplain ordinance. We're getting that together. We're going to be advertising for those, submitting the advertisement to the Farmville Herald this Friday for publication over the next 2 Wednesdays. So my point behind highlighting that is you're going to be busy that night. In addition, that's going to be my last meeting with you. So beyond that, this is your March and April cycle. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude, but this slide is from a couple of weeks ago. What are the desired outcomes of a Farmville plan unit development process? Flexibility. Quite frankly, one of the things that I picked up on was for those who are in opposition, are we arguing against government being more flexible? I was struggling with that one a little bit because that's what this is. We're trying to be more flexible and trying to put in a more flexible process for developers so that we can potentially get to a yes on certain proposals that are appropriate. We are going to retain control. That's a desired outcome. Another desired outcome, density and better design. And something that has been discussed for years, actually, is the housing options available here in Farmville. So we've got developers who are taking a look at Farmville and saying that they've got a proposal or a certain housing product that they want to bring to Farmville, but they can't because of the current ordinance. And then, of course, we talked about increased economic development through a bigger share of the market. So with that being said, this concludes my staff report, my presentation. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it back over to the chair. And while you're doing that, I'll just go ahead and listen. And of course, we have Michelle taking notes as well.
Thank you for that report. Would love to open it up to commissioners if you have any questions regarding what Mr. Pambit shared.
Okay, I got 2.
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Payman, just for the sake of defining so we all know what we're all talking about, You've referenced bulk regulations several times. I tried to look that up in my certified public, planning commission books. I couldn't find anything. I'm assuming when you're saying bulk regulations, you're referring to the standard, or the, just what's already in the ordinances already, right? Bulk regulations.
Right. Bulk regulations are essentially defined as those dimensions that are hard-coded into the ordinance. In the R3, for example, in the R3 high-density residential district, your front yard setback is 15 feet, or 25 feet. Your rear yard setback is 15, side yard setbacks. Your house can only be this tall. Your lots have to be a certain size. That's what I mean by bulk regulations.
And so my other question was, just to clarify something, if you could spin back through the slide deck to the one where you had some examples of properties that might be considered. There you go. So I was looking at in our packet. Maybe I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, or no, I'm not. Well, yeah, I guess it's from Lexington's. At the bottom of page 1 of our background section, it says, it's intended that the planned unit development districts would be established in areas designated as mixed use, commercial use, or special planning areas on the future land use map. And then on B, on page 1 of the Lexington example, it is intended that planned unit development districts be established in areas designated as mixed use, commercial use, or special planning on the future land use map. And so then I see right here on this slide, it says proximity to other commercial areas, centers of employment, transit stops, et cetera. And so I just wanted to either clarify or verify. What we're talking about is very specific types of property. And so it doesn't look like, say, R1 or land that's, zoned R1, R2, or, maybe even R3 would, qualify for PUDs. Is that accurate to say, or?
I think that the existing zoning of the property is not as important as the suitability of the site itself to, number one, to support higher densities, but as a general rule, when you propose and implement higher densities, you want them to be close to these things like other commercial areas, centers of employment, transit stops, or I should just say transportation facilities. If that is existing sidewalks, trails, that kind of thing. So in your future land use map, in the current comprehensive plan, there are areas, these properties might not necessarily be designated for quote unquote mixed use or higher densities. For example, let's go to, and I do have those other slides for reference. That's Sunchase. This piece of property right here, which is off of Marywood Farm Road, and it's essentially behind the Walmart and the Schuels. If I recall correctly, that piece of property is actually zoned R1, and the future land use plan designates that as a low-density piece of property. But it is close to retail. It is close to transit stops because the FAB does run to the Walmart. It wouldn't be such a stretch to add a stop and not delay the bus that much. So I want to make that distinction between zoning and the zoning of a property and its future land use designation. So again, even though this piece of property in the current future land use plan shows it as low density residential And by definition, planned unit development is more of a higher density type development. What a developer would come in and do with their application at that point is not just propose a rezoning, but an amendment to the comprehensive plan, which is perfectly legitimate, perfectly legal. But what you want to do is you want your future land use map, or you want your decisions based off of your future land use map. There's nothing saying that you can't change your future land use map on the fly, but if this is designated low-density residential, for example, and they don't apply for an amendment to the future land use map, again, that's separate from a rezoning, then you're basically saying that that's not an appropriate decision. So what we as the staff would do is, I mean, that's the first thing that we're going to refer to is the comprehensive plan, both the text portion as well as the maps that advise us and guide us on these types of decisions.
And so in this instance, you're saying that the future land use map is more relevant to PUDs than, say, the existing zoning map?
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
Because I'm looking at the future land use map, and that same piece of property that you're referencing right now, that's that's coded general commercial.
What we have here up on the screen is the future land use map. And this shows low-density residential. So maybe we're talking about different pieces of property, but, and I don't have the mouse with me that I can kind of show, but that's just an example.
This is one of the things that I kind of had a question about too, because I went over the land use, future land use part of the comprehensive plan. And in that, when we're talking about future conditions, we've got the East Third Mixed-Use Gateway and the West Third Institutional Gateway that both talk about strategies to achieve the successful mixed-use gateway include, and one of those is seeking designation as an urban development area, and that the purpose of UDAs is to allow the concentration of growth in certain areas to guide the design of such areas to ensure they are livable and attractive environments. The essential design criteria include pedestrian-friendly road design, interconnected streets, preservation of natural areas, mixed-use neighborhoods, reduction of front and side setbacks, among other things. And I'm wondering how these work together, PUDs and these UDAs, and why aren't we focusing on UDAs and the things that we already have in our comprehensive plan that we say we're going to be working on instead of branching out into a whole new area?
Okay, so the urban development area is actually if I recall correctly, a VDOT process that is, you designate an area as an urban development area, and it's related, but that's not a quote-unquote regulation that is administered by the town. That is a VDOT state-level process that essentially highlights an area for certain traffic studies, for certain, and I don't want to say funding, I don't want to step out of place on that one, but it's not the same as a planned unit development ordinance. That is not a land use regulation, the urban development area. The urban development area is almost akin to an overlay. I call it a cousin of a local overlay, but it's kind of a state level, process. There is no local land use regulation that's involved in an urban development area designation. I'd be happy to come back with more information on that, but I think that all of these things in conjunction, establishing through your future land use plan some sort of land use designation that's mixed use, higher densities, that kind of thing, with a plan, with an urban development area designation from the state, as well as a local plan unit development ordinance, certainly dovetail and, I guess, point the compass in the direction of higher densities and all of those other design characteristics that are mentioned in the comprehensive plan. Interconnected streets, sidewalks, amenities, things of that sort.
Right, and these are, the thing I look at with these two mixed-use gateways, they're located close to our downtown. So in my mind, they're going to feed people into those downtown businesses, which I think is a important part of Farmville. And I'd hate to see anything hurt our downtown area because it's now going out over by Walmart or something. So it confused me as to why we have these areas designated in our future land use, but then we're looking at places by Clark Street and Marywood and all that on the maps that you showed us, that's all.
Mr. Pambit, my question was, can you speak to the density bonuses? I know based on the info you've provided, it's some localities have gone that direction, others have not. From your perspective, what might be some of the considerations that would lead you?
Density bonuses are one of the more powerful incentives, if you will, for developers, especially in larger localities. If you are allowed to exceed established densities, either, if those established densities are hard-coded into the zoning ordinance, which we do not have, but we do reference established densities in the comprehensive plan, we're going to be guided by those densities that are stated in the comprehensive plan. If someone comes in for a rezoning, for example, and they say, well, I want to exceed the densities that are in the comprehensive plan, and we don't have a vehicle for doing that, then we can still process their application, but the staff is definitely going to mention that in its staff report and make a recommendation accordingly. One of the things that we have to recognize is, yes, developers do make more money when they're allowed to have more units. But if we say you can exceed the densities or you can build up to a certain density if you are close to fresh food, if you are close to, or if you have a certain amount of open space, for example. Lynchburg and the city of Winchester have different density bonuses for impervious area, for example. That's coverage. Affordable housing is one. Community facilities, alternative energy, and again, proximity to fresh food. Lynchburg, theirs are based on buffer width, proximity to a mobility or transit stop, pedestrian enhancements. Mixed use is a mobility consideration. So if you can reduce that commute time, or if you can take cars off of the streets or off of the highways and people don't have to necessarily use their cars, then you get quote unquote points for that density bonus. Affordable or workforce housing is another one. Increased water quality. So generally, housing, transportation, and environmental considerations are, those are things that you can incentivize through increased density.
Any other questions from commissioners? Mr. Croup?
I have a lot, and I apologize.
That's what we're here for.
Part of my question was on density bonus, and so just to be clear, is this if then, this then that. So like if the base in the either hard-coded or in the comp plan is 20 units per acre, and then a developer comes in and says, you know, my building will have alternative energy, then it's 30 units per acre, like, and that's laid out, or like, I guess structurally, how does that work?
There's typically a multiplier or a ratio that's applied. If you provide a certain amount of open space, for example, then you can exceed the established density by, you know, again, it really depends on what we want, 1.5, 2, or whatever. I can certainly provide you with examples of that, but to answer your question, it's not a subjective decision. It's always associated with some sort of measurable ratio. Yeah, that is hard-coded in the ordinance.
And the ratios are like industry standards, or where do we get that from?
Comparisons, industry standards, maybe even academic studies, but they would come from from a variety of sources.
Okay. And the density bonuses, are they generally tied to like the character of development sections of the, you know, are they linked to what we're driving, or are they like a separate list of criteria?
I'm trying to understand your question. Are you asking like where would they appear in the ordinance? Or?
No, so like where, you know, how do we, so in the draft that you've provided for us, you have the goal of plan unit development district, character of development, you've got pedestrian orientation, neighborhood friendly streets, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Would the density bonuses be, you know, tied to those things, or because they seem very different than the characteristics we've listed there?
They could be tied to whatever we want to incentivize.
Okay.
If we want to incentivize renewable energy, then you could pick up on that.
Okay.
If you want to, if you want to incentivize open space or bigger landscape buffers, you can tie it to that. But I think that those specific things that you're incentivizing, you're right. They should be tied to some of these more general considerations. Let me back up to, I think this is the list that you were trying to read from. So, yeah.
Okay. So I think the next, and I think it probably leads into a larger discussion, but so it's not tied to zoning. It's tied to future land use that could be amended. And so I guess, why is it tied to minimum acreage and density? And the reason I ask this is I think Farmville is a little bit unique in a lot of ways, that it has, you know, either current or former agricultural areas, which are low, low density uses, but I think this could still be used for that, to, put a development that meets topography or whatnot. And then my other thought here is, like, I think a lot of us have scar tissue from a former project that's not too far from here, and I wonder if this would have been a process that could have been used for that. But it's that I think it may have been 2 acres total. It was probably less, and so I just wonder, like, why tie it to those two things if the goal is to give us flexibility? If a developer wants to come in and redevelop, a fifth of an acre here in downtown, or, put a mixed use kind of bodega style cafe and residential somewhere on Griffith Boulevard, like, why would we not allow for that flexibility? So I guess that was kind of a long-winded question. Does that make sense?
And it really all depends on what the planning commission and the town council want to enable. I will mention that one developer that I spoke with was considering a site as small as 3/4 of an acre, where the list that I provided you has anything from 100 all the way down to 2 acres. But, you know, if we see fit that a 3/4 of an acre site is suitable and is desirable to accomplish infill redevelopment, for example, then why not? So I think that if that's something that you want us to consider or you want to discuss more, we'd be happy to maybe look for some more examples, but that is strictly a local decision. Just because, you know, one locality says we're not going to allow planned unit developments for anything less than 2 acres doesn't mean that that we couldn't. In larger cities, you can, you know, developers can fit a lot on, you know, I should say a great quantity of units on an acre if they're building up, for example. But that process would have to be enabled for them to do that. I think that I want to look into the city of Richmond to see if, you know, that's more of a higher density metropolitan type city. Their planned unit development ordinance might be a little bit different than, say, a smaller town, for example. But I understand your question. I think I understand your point. Is there a limit? Is there a bottom limit to what we could consider a minimum lot size? I think that one of the things that you want to be wary of is looking at a site that's too small to where it sounds like that you might really be issuing a variance more than anything else. That's where I would kind of draw the line where, yeah, you do need a minimum lot size so that you're not, you know, you're not essentially issuing a variance for, say, a single piece of, you know, a single house. There was a statement in a newspaper article recently that this would be applicable to a single piece of, you know, like to a single house. I'd like to correct that here, and really this is more for development for multiple units and not just one house.
So I think I understand that in relation to one house, but I don't understand it in relation to, you know, one property that is 1/4 of an acre, right? Like, because I think one of the things that we've talked about is this provides flexibility and creativity for developers. And so in my mind, you know, if we give it the largest, you know, number of properties that it can be applied to, then it can do some other things like be used as a tool for development in our, in those areas that we've identified in the future use, land use map. And I guess in my mind, I'm just thinking about it in more than just like your, you know, your large property, 20+ acre, because I think it has some, you know, some potential there. Okay, I got one other, I think, and so my follow-up comment there is I think that conversation and the potential map causes a lot of confusion for that reason. Like, and I understand what staff has done, but that map is predicated on assumptions that I'm not sure we're at yet. You know, because we could very well get to a point where depending on use and if you meet the characters of development, like any property in town is applicable. Maybe not the single-family house, which I definitely agree with that, but, so my other question, or I guess my comment is, so for the next public hearing, just hearing some of the feedback during the last public hearing, I think my recommendation would be to delay that a week or two, just to give more opportunity for advertisement, especially when it sounds like it's unlikely we would be doing any substantive work on this in the February meeting, just because of our other workload. So if we're not doing it until March, I think, push it back a week or two to give the public as much opportunity to participate as they so choose. That's all I have for now.
Any other questions? Commissioner Weiss, I don't want to leave you out.
Thank you, Chairman. I was waiting for everybody else to go because I know that logistically there's some issues with having to move the mic back and forth. So I'm happy to share my thoughts, my questions now if you'd like, but I wanted to make sure everybody else had a chance first before we got into the logistical issues.
Jane, did you?
I just had one question, and that was on this chart you gave us, which is great. Thank you so much. I found this very helpful for easily comparing all these different locations. But when in the column for abandonment, sometimes it says rezoning runs with the land. And in that case, does that mean if the developer comes to us and says, I want a PUD, and we say, yeah, here you go, and then his plan gets approved and everything, but he never does it, somebody else could come and buy that property and do a PUD, would they have to go through the approval of what their plan would be?
Rezoning running with the land means that rezoning, any proffers or conditions that were approved at that time would be applicable to anybody regardless of who the property owner is. So in your scenario where an applicant goes through the rezoning process, which is essentially what this would be, they successfully obtain a plan unit development, permit or whatever you want to call it from the town council, and that gets sold to somebody else, that other developer would still have to comply with that master plan. Let's not forget that at the very heart of this plan unit development is a master plan that everybody saw, everybody vetted, and the Planning Commission reviewed and made a recommendation on. They can't, and if they don't want to, if they don't want to, say the new owner does not want to go with that, then they would have to go through the process again, for sure. Yeah.
Mr. Weiss, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you all hear me okay? Yep. Okay, super. So I have three areas of thought or inquiry I want to share with the rest of the Planning Commission and the staff, and we can talk about it now, or y'all can just think about this. And I'll start with the first area is a comment I made at the public information session. And apparently it resonated with a lot of people, including pretty quickly with the mayor. And my point was sort of the flip side of the comment about more rooftops. And, more rooftops, more revenue, et cetera. The flip side of that is maybe more revenue. It may also be a net loss to the town or to any municipality. If all we end up doing with the PUD, let me time out. Let me back up and say I'm still very much a proponent of the concept of a PUD. I think they can be very powerful tools to be flexible and creative with zoning development and the future planning of a community. But if used incorrectly, it can put a community in fiscal distress because you have a lot of residences and not the commercial tax base to go with it. And so if all we end up doing with a PUD is essentially, maybe other than maybe a convenience store here or there, or a park here or there mixed in with the density calculation, if all we're really doing is creating a lot of rooftops, we're also creating a lot of expense for the town to provide, or the surrounding county, because of the schools, provide school services, social services, welfare services, police services, fire services, utility services, just the list goes on and on. So I just want to make sure we're being thoughtful about that calculus, that what we're creating here with more density, more flexibility with uses and so on, we're doing it in a balanced approach so that the town and the taxpayers of the town have either net neutral impact or better yet, net positive impact in terms of the revenue and the net considerations for the town. So I got some pretty quick feedback on that comment at the hearing, at the info session, and then subsequently. So I just wanted to elaborate on that a bit and share with y'all that that point I was making did resonate with folks about let's think about, can we, for example, build into the PUD ordinance a fiscal impact analysis? You know, the Lexington example that we've been given requires various studies. It's 4 or 5 different types of studies of the developer, of the applicant, to get a PUD assessed and approved. So would it make sense, for example, to have a fiscal impact analysis or an economic impact analysis from the developer so that the town understands, over the next, say, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the right horizon would be, if this development occurs, what the impact of that on the town is going to be in terms of services and the cost of the services. So that's one point. The second point is, and Doug Stanley brought this up at the info session about that the county has a PUD already. It's basically underutilized. It really has not achieved its potential. But the county, Prince Edward County, in its zoning ordinance, has elements of the PUD approaches which we could consider either mirroring or at least synchronizing with, so that we're working with the county and not doing something oblivious to what the county has in its zoning ordinance about PUDs. The county has a village cluster section of its zoning ordinance. It has a planned community section of its ordinance too. So I throw that out, and as I think you all know, I'm on that planning commission too. So I throw that out as something right here, basically surrounding us, as an example of what we could be looking at and perhaps adopting, modifying for the town's purposes. In any event, I think that we should, whatever we do, we should keep our eyes wide open to making sure it is in sync with the counties and the areas that surround us too. And then lastly, I would ask, should we be looking at the track records of the PUD ordinances, that whether it's Lexington or Winchester or Halifax County or whatever, or yet others we haven't looked at yet? What's been the track record? How many PUDs have been approved? How many were denied? How did those PUDs pan out? Did they achieve their promise? Did they not? What does it look like now? So I think it's helpful for us to have examples of other ordinances. It's, I think, also helpful for us to have examples of actual developments and how they played out. And I would also, just listening to Commissioner Crute echo, the notion that do we really want to tie this to any particular amount of land? Is it really, about, regardless of the amount of land involved, is it what's going to be a net positive impact on the community of any size, big or small? So that's what was going through my head as I listened to everybody and reflected on the info session we had a little while ago.
Appreciate those comments and the comments from everyone. I'm curious, Mr. Weiss, as I hear your comments, when you talk about physical impact analysis or economic impact analysis, would you view that as being something that anyone would bring to the table regardless of the size of the project?
I was thinking initially, yes, particularly if any size project or whatever that threshold is to do a PUD, if they have to do, an environmental analysis or, wetlands, whatever else they have to do, this would be in the mix. Now, of course, they're going to use professionals to do the analysis. But I think the flip side of your question is, I think that as a commission, we can consider, yeah, well, that may be just an awful lot of homework and an awful lot of analysis for something on a half acre of land, if that's what we're doing, let's just say. But I get the point of your question is maybe there's a threshold above which, the number of units or certain size acreage or something where a requirement like that is triggered instead of just every single PUD. I'm flexible on the concept. I just want to throw out the concept for everybody to think about is should we be including fiscal impact as well?
Yeah, I think the concept's important. And, I like where Commissioner Crute is going as it relates to, not tying ourselves regarding the land requirement piece. I think the flexibility and the creativity is an important consideration. Welcome comments as they continue to come. I know that on our agenda, we do have public participation listed. Just for the record of the meeting tonight, is there anyone that has signed up?
No, sir.
Thank you. We are able to continue our discussion, and any additional comments regarding the packet of items laid forth?
I like that notion of the impact analysis. But also it seems that some of the, design considerations or some of the benefits of a PUD may not be able to be perfectly quantified, especially if we're talking in terms of, conservation, historical preservation and workforce and affordable housing. I mean, not having seen, I don't think probably any fiscal impact analyses or economic impact analyses. I don't know if those, take into these kind of, important maybe social and historical and cultural considerations. I think I'd also want, to see something like that kind of balanced as well, since those things are in our comprehensive plan. And have been, documented as, needed and wanted by the community.
I think some of one of the main consideration when looking at whether or not to require a fiscal impact analysis, we're throwing around terms like fiscal impact analysis or economic impact analysis. Whatever term you use, be very specific about the scope of that study, because are we talking about the impact to the local coffers, our local budget? If we are expected to take on an additional, 3 miles of streets that are eventually going to be accepted into the system, do we have the manpower or the staffing to push the snow or to pick up the trash? Or are we talking about X number of rooftops equals X number of, X amount of tax revenue, real estate tax revenue, for example? I think that would be a relatively simple calculation. But some of those other things that are not quantifiable from a social standpoint. I mean, you might try, but what do we mean by fiscal impact? Impact to our budget specifically, I think makes sense, definitely. And there are some examples of, let me back up. Other localities require that. I don't see, I think that would be a common sense thing to require, especially of a larger development. If we're talking about 10 units or whatever, that's not going to have much of an impact. One of the other things that we need to consider is these folks or these applicants are potentially going through a process of rezoning, which is clearly bringing themselves under a higher level of scrutiny. However, we've got pieces of property here in town where they're just larger pieces of property. Somebody wants to come in and say, hey, my property is zoned R1 and I want to do 75 units and I can do that by right if I comply with the ordinance. And no studies are required. They still have to go through the public hearing processes of going to the Planning Commission and the Town Council for final plats and preliminary plats and all that. But there isn't any quote unquote discretionary action there. Things like conditional use permits and rezonings are discretionary, where nobody should come to us with the expectation that just because they pay their fee and they fill out their form and give us everything, that's it, that they're going to get their rezoning or their conditional use permit. Obviously, we want to try to get to a yes on things that make sense, but just be aware that there are other large-scale developments that are enabled in the ordinance by right that are not, that they are by right, not discretionary, meaning that if they comply, then they get to do it. So in that case, do we have the wherewithal or the authority to ask for, economic impact analysis or fiscal impact analysis? Just some food for thought. One other thing that I also wanted to mention with regards to track records, Commissioner Weiss, is that's kind of hard for us to quantify because of the makeup of a planning commission, what their points of emphasis are, elected bodies, suitability of sites. Those are the kinds of variables that we would have to take into account when trying to, I guess, quantify a quote-unquote track record. If it's a simple matter of calling up a locality and saying, in the past 5 years or in the past 10 years, how many plan unit development ordinance or plan unit development applications have you received, and how many have actually been, 1, approved by the governing body, and 2, actually built, I'm not saying that's easy. It would be a little bit labor intensive, but that's more specific than, trying to account for a lot of what I would consider subjective variables. Again, public discourse, composition of planning commissioners, composition of elected bodies. I think that really factors into whether or not a plan unit development actually gets approved. What are their position on, what's their position, what that locality's position is on growth, for example. If there's something specific like what I had just mentioned, calling up a locality, how many applications versus how many approvals versus, how many actually got built, time consuming but possible.
Yeah, Mr. Bandit, I certainly had in mind more of the simpler, straightforward statistical version of not the politics behind what was going on at like the city or town council at the time and the planning commission and all that and the makeup of the bodies at the time, just statistically, what's happened since they approved the ordinances. And yeah, I know that, things, rezoning requests, those numbers are kept track of. CUP numbers are kept track of. Building permits are kept track of, so I don't think that's a heavy lift. At least I hope it isn't. But I at least, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I at least would be interested in actually putting my eyes on some of the PUDs that have actually come out of the ground in some of these communities, driving to, wherever they may be, Lynchburg or elsewhere, and just seeing one or two and, what they actually did, or at least seeing some photos. But that's a corollary to, what happened after these communities enacted their PUDs. How many happened? How many didn't happen? And did they, again, achieve what the applicant said? We're going to build 25 homes and a strip mall and leave land aside for the new elementary school and a park and this and that. Did that happen?
Thank you for that. I know we've had a robust discussion thus far. I appreciate the questions that folks have brought to the table. I think we've got some good considerations of info we might like to further explore. I think we've got some thoughts that have come to the table as to how staff might move forward with further recommendations and considerations. So I do want to make sure everyone's had their thoughts explored and questions answered. Perfect. So, Mr. Pambit, I know we want to move, where do we go from here? I know we've got considerations for our next public participation session. I think we're trending thought-wise that we want to ensure that we give ourselves ample time to have this advertised for folks that might want to join us. I think based on that comment, I don't know if the 6th, which is the Monday, would work. Do folks think the 9th is a feasible consideration?
The 9th is only 2 weeks away. I really don't. I mean, we got a lot of pushback, I think, at the last one that it wasn't well advertised and people didn't know about it. And I think we need to do everything we can to make sure that this one has a better chance. One of the things that is a great way, I think, of getting word out, because I look at it anyway, is the insert that comes in our water bills now. But you have to have a little bit of time to be able to get it in everybody's water bill and then have the meeting after we receive our water bills. But that's just one thought.
Yeah, I agree with Abby. I was going to suggest the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I am all for making sure we advertise well. I do think ultimately folks will decide for themselves what they choose to prioritize in terms of their engagement. But I do want to ensure that we at least present the opportunity to have that participation and dialogue. Mr. Pambit, if the water excerpt was a route to go, when does that occur?
I'd have to find out. I don't know when that goes out. Do you know when the water bill?
mean, I would argue that that probably is too late to push this. Mr. Croup?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I agree. If we're all in agreement on the assumption that we're not going to address this in the February meeting, our next meeting would be the 15th, I guess, something like that.
Wednesday, the 15th of March.
Yeah, and so we could schedule a public hearing for sometime the week of the 1st or sometime the week of the 8th of March, and go ahead and publicize it through the normal means, the newspaper and social media platforms and whatnot, and then we still potentially have the opportunity to get the water bill included. And for the record, I agree 100%. People are going to decide what they want to participate in, but I do think, again, since we're not going to address this before March the 15th, then we have the time to, make the effort.
Based on Mr. Crout's comments, what is the pleasure of others? I do want us to not walk out of here tonight having settled on where we want to go directionally. I will hit you one by one. Abby?
I'm sorry?
I'm going to hit you one by one.
Oh, I agree with Patrick. I think if we're not going to talk about PUDs again until the 15th of March, we could certainly do it in early March.
Mr. Miller, Dr. Miller?
I'll be honest, I think Thursday, February 9th is sufficient time. That's 2 weeks from now. I think, it's been in the newspaper, it's been on Facebook, it's been on the town website. I mean, the people that said they didn't know about it, they were there, to be candid with you. And I think if we do it on February 9th, then that gives us, or gives staff enough time to go back and, start making some of these, our suggestions that we've discussed tonight, and then given, the town people's, their recommendations. And given that, the lead on this project is leaving 2 weeks afterwards, 2 weeks after the 9th, I'd like to capitalize on his available expertise. And then, work on that kind of over February, and then we have something that we're having more specific discussions about at the March meeting. But all that said, I'm certainly amenable to pushing it back to early March if that's what the consensus is too. I see the merit in that. I just see the merit also in kind of moving forward on February 9th.
Ms. Johnson?
Well, my preference is to hold it in March. However, I think it does, the fact that Lee's going to be leaving the 15th, and he is the person that seems to be is taking the lead on this. If he wasn't here, who would take the lead, I guess? Who would the responsibility just?
Yeah, the town manager would. And I have verbally said that I would support him in any way that I can through this process. It won't be at the same level that I'm doing it now, obviously, but yeah, the show will go on.
Right.
Mr. Weiss? Mr. Weiss?
I believe that the public input and opportunities to discuss and ask questions and such outweigh the departure of Mr. Pambit, although that, yes, that will be a loss. I think that we understand his input, at least I think we do. He's been very forthcoming with his information on the subject, and Ashley's been around the whole time and will still be here after Mr. Pambit's departure. So it's not an easy answer. It's not a right or wrong answer. It's a optimal situation, but I think that the opportunity to let the citizens know as much as possible, particularly if no decisions are going to be made or no recommendations are going to be made until March and beyond. I think that argues for public participation. And also just anecdotally, to the extent that any town council members have discussed the matter with me, they're in no hurry on this, at least the ones that have discussed it with me. They would rather have the public input, and if the public is interested in giving it, and that I think we also just be very informed and smart about what we're doing here.
Well, based on the will of the group, we will aim for March, and I know we all will be very active in our publicizing of this effort to members of the community. And so we will await further detail from staff regarding logistics of this effort. If there are no further comments, Mr. Pambit, if there are any logistical items you care to lead us out with, I think we're nearing the end.
Yeah, none at this time. I've already talked about your meeting on February 15th, 2 public hearings we've known about for a while. After that, I'll be leaving you in the hands of the remaining staff. Basically, that's going to be Scott and Ashley. We still owe you a preliminary agenda for that meeting. As I've mentioned before, we always try to provide you a preliminary agenda about 3 weeks in advance. Just know that the preliminary agenda is basically going to say you're going to be hearing the deferred case, and then you're going to be talking about the floodplain ordinance. So we hope to bring that to you either tomorrow or Friday. I suppose if there's anything else that you would like for me to consider, or you would like for us to kind of suss out or to research, contact me or Ashley. But what we'll do is we will work towards a publicity plan. Basically everything that you've talked about, social media. It's been in the newspaper twice already, but if we have to pull an ad for that, we can do that. We'll come up with some other things as well. But I think that if we're looking at March, it would be useful for us to kind of have a date in mind. I was going to suggest that if you wanted to do this while I'm here, February 13th might be a consideration. Of course, you've got a meeting on the 15th, but March 15th being the third Wednesday, just some basic considerations. Do you want that to fall during a town council meeting week or a work session, or is Tuesday better than Thursday? It would be really helpful for the staff to know what date we're targeting in basically another month and a half.
I'm gonna, and if any commissioners are feeling otherwise, I mean, my thought would be I'd be comfortable if staff were to go back and take a look to come forward with a date. I think this group was most concerned about how do we optimize advertisement. So as long as we get the date in the water insert, and logistically, location-wise, wherever we go, works.
Okay.
I'd feel fine for staff to lead on that.
So we'll pick a date and we'll get back to you.
I have one follow-up. Mr. Pambid, does staff feel like they're in a place where, so we have the example ordinance from Lexington. Does staff feel like they're in a place where they could begin to draft what a Farmville ordinance would look like? I mean, I speaking for myself, I think I understand and have had my questions answered conceptually. And I kind of feel myself starting to transition to like thinking about the specifics, like the minimum acreage, what are the characteristics of development. And I just wonder, to Dr. Miller's point, that we don't lose the next month, especially the time that you have remaining, that if we can't kind of do some of this concurrently. And I also wonder if debating the actual draft ordinance would kind of focus our conversations moving forward. I throw that out for the group.
We could certainly start transitioning to putting pen to paper, to start crafting language. I know that I've been saying Lexington a lot, and the reason why Lexington kind of stands out in my mind, in addition to the fact that it's a comparable town or city to us, disregard the form of government for a minute, but the community is very similar to Farmville in my opinion. The other thing is it's kind of in the middle in terms of the amount of regulation I feel is appropriate. We don't want to go with a Winchester. I would suggest that we don't want to go with something as small as, let's see, Lynchburg was only 3 pages, but they had a lot of references in other parts of their ordinance as well. So, could the staff start pulling together what it feels is some of the best portions or some of the best of what these other ordinances have to offer? Having heard what the Planning Commission has said and members of the public have said, and again, start crafting language based off of that, yeah, we could do that. It's not going to be ready before the next information session, or certainly not ready before the next Planning Commission meeting in a couple of weeks. But if you're looking for a conceptual ordinance that pulls from other ones, that pulls from other cities and counties and towns, that's basically a copy and paste job. And of course, we would continue to fine tune that as we look at that. So it's not a one and done. We would constantly tweak that. We're in a position to do that, to answer your question.
Yeah, I think we've got to go into that next information session. It would be helpful to be armed with some idea of where we're going from a Farmville perspective, so that we can move away from, this is what we're considering from other communities, and have a thought. I mean, it might not be the completed thought, but it at least allows us something to articulate to the public. Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Weiss, I will ask you, since you're virtual, I can't see your face clearly.
I'm all set. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, perfect. Any other staff comment?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your engagement tonight. I think it was very beneficial to the continued work we'll do. And I will ask for we can't vote. So by consensus, we will consider this meeting to be adjourned.